First, let's talk about apostasy.
And apostates will give us absolutely nothing of value in exchange.
So he's really describing the traits of apostates today, isn't he?
Man went from an apostle to an apostate.
Is the center of apostate religion.
Well, something similar went on during the apostasy.
View or blinded people by means of apostate teachings.
Treat them as the poison they are.
Oh, so the elders are afraid of apostates. Let's show them one.
Lord Magog.
Yes, my master.
Arise.
We would be honored if you would join us. Growing up, I didn't really understand the elders' fear of apostates, their anger towards them, their hatred of them, and all the suffering they'd endure to get rid of one. But little did they know, they create a monster themselves. Hello and welcome back to the Darth Magog channel. I'm your host, the Dark Lord of the Apostates, Darth Magog. And I don't have much experience with Watchtower or the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, not as much as most people, but still, that experience has been strong enough to turn me into whatever combination of gothic-styled machine and millennial that stands before you. My story is a cautionary tale of what can happen if you put your faith in an organization that doesn't respect you enough to let you live without their management, when they can barely manage to manage themselves. This is how I went from Born In Ministerial Servant to an apostate watching for the tower to collapse, in my own voice. As many Jehovah's Witness youth are, I was born a witness. My grandparents joined the organization. I'm not sure exactly how it happened. I do know my grandfather on my father's side was a very active pioneer, and towards the end of his life, he was still giving public talks. Either which way, my father was born in 2. The youngest of 9 children, he grew up and became a good publisher. Went to school and wrapped up around high school, accepting a fairly menial job and dropping out of college, despite his athletic skills so he could support a family. Said family included my mother. Unlike my father, my mother was a converted Jehovah's Witness. She hasn't told me the full story, but the nearest I can piece it together, it went like this. Apparently, my grandmother had passed on in my mother's youth, somewhere around age 10 or 12. I only know this because that's about when the witnesses came knocking on her door, and they came with a promise. A promise to a little girl who was grieving the loss of her mother, that she would have many things, that she would never grow old, that she'd have a beautiful home, everlasting life, pet animals, and most importantly, she'd have a mom again. This would have been right around 1975 or so, during one of the most zealous preaching campaigns the Witnesses ever had, and that grieving preteen girl bought the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker. Because she was a child, she was vulnerable, and there wasn't any objective source of information for her to learn from. She stopped participating in holiday activities, even when my aunts and uncles did not, and, against all odds, she was baptized soon after. My parents would find each other in a small congregation in Brooklyn, New York not too long after, and got married in their early 20s in the year 1986. From then on, my father had lost all his zeal. I've never exactly discovered why, but he wouldn't be consistent in the ministry or in meeting attendance. My mother, however, stayed very strong in the faith. That's where I finally come in. Born to 2 normal witness parents, generally a one-income house, with my mother working a bit part-time to keep us ahead of bills and keep saving. My childhood was generally unremarkable for your typical New York kid. I had a fascination with trains, quite like cartoons, and enjoyed being around family. Outside of Kingdom Hall activities, family visits were the only sort of socialization we had. My father's family was composed entirely of believers, so that was never any trouble. We even had a witness-run nursery school that I went to, proudly carrying my mother's old 1977 print of my book of Bible stories in my handsome Thomas the Tank Engine book bag. My life didn't change much, even with the birth of my siblings, for a while. Frankly, I didn't have a concept that there were non-Jehovah's Witnesses in the world until I went to public school. My first memory of finding out that we were different was in the celebration of a birthday. Not my birthday, not my sibling's birthday, not even a classmate's. I barely even knew my own birthday, and I knew we didn't celebrate it. No, this was the celebration of a stuffed dog's birthday. I had a blue stuffed dog, and I thought it would be fun to gather my toys and have a party for his birthday. So I held him up, marched out of my room, and brought him straight to my parents so we could help sing happy birthday to him. And, to my dismay, I was given a stern talking to. "We don't sing happy birthday," my father said. "We sing rock and roll, sure," my mother said, offering an alternative. But frankly, I wasn't interested in an alternative. I didn't know any rock and roll songs and didn't have the music to go with them, so it didn't mean much to me. I just remember leaving the living room rather dejected. This is a small example of othering and isolation, but just the fact that something as minor as that is stuck in my memory for nearly 30 years is telling. Even something as silly or meaningless as refusing to sing happy birthday to a stuffed toy at an imaginary birthday party is enough to make a difference in a child's life if your religion dictates it. I began to notice birthdays and Christmas more and more often as I grew. I had learned to sing the birthday song at school, but found myself excluded from birthday celebrations pretty quickly, given that I wasn't allowed to sing by my parents or my religion. I grew to despise holidays for no other reason than my constant exclusion. Holidays were everywhere. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Easter, even St. Patrick's Day was stressful. Birthday party invites were often stacked up on my desk, and I would inquire from time to time, but it was clear that I'd never get to go to one. My parents had both started working out of the house by the time my youngest sibling was in school, so free time was minimal. When they weren't at work, we had field service and Sunday meetings to attend. I don't remember really enjoying meetings either. Most of the material was pretty difficult for me to grasp in my childhood, and I'd be lying to you if I said I remembered anything other than that Armageddon was coming and that men of the last days were puffed up with pride. That was all they told us about our theology, really. Oh, that and Hunchback of Notre Dame was full of things Jehovah didn't like. It's certainly not my favorite Disney film by any stretch of the imagination, but it was strange that all the magic and mayhem in other Disney films, Hunchback was where my congregation drew the line. Either way, meetings were the only instance where I didn't feel out of place. Granted, unlike many in this religion, I went to a pretty low-key public school. It was small and tight-knit, and it was in the 90s. Colorblindness was part of the curriculum. Being a different race, ethnicity, or religion didn't matter to most kids. They had questions, sure, like where I'd go during holiday celebrations. There were a few other witness kids, and some Jewish kids I know too that skipped out on Christmas. Halloween was always another big one that we ended up in the computer lab for. But that's about all the involvement my religion had on my schooling. The rest was just isolation and a lack of free time outside of school hours. My parents kept our social circle small. The story of Dinah was often chosen from my book of Bible horrors to reinforce that. I didn't have much in common with most kids from the Kingdom Hall, though that didn't matter much. We started getting a little irregular meetings once I was on my way out of elementary school, so I didn't see them much anyway. We didn't go over to any houses. My parents assumed siblings were enough to socialize a child, and so it was for some time. A funny thing happened between my last few days in elementary school on my way to junior high school, though. Two things, actually. One was that my father had stopped going to the Kingdom Hall entirely. At one point or another, he was at least getting us ready and getting us out the door to conventions and all, but eventually, even that ceased. And it was roughly at that point that my mother seemed to burn out on the religion too. She had taken the lead since father had given up, and I frankly couldn't have been happier. I found myself with a bit more acceptance, having worldly friends, gaining worldly interests. The Kingdom Hall had really taken to killing all my other interests, like Harry Potter and Pokemon, both decried as demonized. So this, pardon the expression, was a godsend for me. There was even a bit of peace for that brief moment, until my parents' marriage fell apart. In typical Jehovah's Witness fashion, when my parents started having marital troubles, we reflexively returned to the Kingdom Hall. At that point, however, I had developed my reading comprehension skills dramatically and all the talks started making sense. This was just after the new millennium, so we were expecting Armageddon any 10 minutes now, and it was clear that something had to be done. We did more field service, we attended more meetings, I was learning how to quickly flip through the Bible and even taking notes at the meetings. But just as suddenly as our family's zeal came, it went away, just like that. My parents gave up on the Kingdom Hall, and shortly thereafter, divorced. I was in junior high school by then and had my own issues to worry about. Raging hormones, schoolmates, and increasingly demanding studies. More importantly, I had started developing a sense of some independence, some freedom, and agency, as most teenagers do, and I also developed a sense of resentment towards the religion and my parents for putting me through it. I had missed out on 13 years of birthday parties and probably a proper first girlfriend, dozens of sleepovers, and traditional bonding experiences that shaped a normal, functioning person. I had escaped some of this through compartmentalization and living something of a double life. Not to smoke or to do drugs, but just to have normal conversations with normal friends. For as long as that lasted, anyway. It wouldn't be long, however, until Jehovah's organization, dissatisfied with my parents, came knocking again. And that's where I made my gravest mistake. One of the elders arrived at my mother's door with a ministerial servant for an informal shepherding call. You see, this was back when inactive ones were still okay to visit and offer encouragement to, and my parents, despite their divorce, were never actually disciplined for it with disfellowshipping. I suspect this didn't register with the elder because we had moved and he was from a different congregation. He had only reached out because he knew my parents from a previous congregation we attended when I was very young. Now, my mother didn't typically like answering the door for men, especially when she didn't expect anyone, so I popped by the door to see what's up. My mother recognized the brother, let's call him Brother J for now. She invited him and the other brother, we'll call him Brother K, inside for a break. They all spoke and caught up a bit, and then dropped off some literature, then agreed to pop by next week to see how it went. I ended up reading most of it on my own, so their shepherding call quickly became a return visit. You see where this is going. Yes, I was now subject to an official Jehovah's Witness Bible study. I didn't think much of this indoctrination attempt. Granted, I was in my early teens and theoretically should have been less susceptible to their methods, but I had many factors working against me. 1. I was still young and looking for a sense of identity. 2. I was a young man without a sense of heritage, and this community provided that for me. And 3. I had already been indoctrinated before at an early age. I have memories of falling asleep to my book of Bible stories audio cassettes as a child and even conducting my own meetings with it. So they didn't need to do much brainwashing. This was just a quick rinse and pop in the dryer. With all that working against me, it wasn't long until myself and my siblings were back in the grasp of the Watchtower. Brother J and his wife Sister J had taken a liking to us, and soon we found ourselves as prominent members of the congregation. You see, Brother and Sister J were former Bethelites. Brother J was the presiding overseer, hosted the Monday night book study, and was a regular pioneer, on top of being head of household. They held a very prestigious position within the congregation, and my siblings and I were treated like eldest kids. Despite our lack of baptism, we studied hard and participated a lot. You'd seen a love bomb? Well, this was a love carpet bombing. What made it worse was the fact that we assumed this was normal. Having been raised by witnesses, returning to the Kingdom Hall wasn't a jarring experience. It was more like putting on an old pair of shoes that you hadn't worn in a while. Just clean them off, lace them up, and you're ready to go. I won't say the experience was all bad at first. We started slowly with the Bible studies, then back to the Kingdom Hall for Watchtower study and public talk. Before we knew it, we were going to the book study and even enrolling in the theocratic ministry school. In what seemed like a meteoric rise for us kids, working hard even without our parents drew praise, which drew us closer to the religion. Well, I won't speak for my siblings, but I certainly felt that way. It gave me a sense of accomplishment. At this point, I was getting into high school and finding that I had a lot more trouble fitting in. My parents had enrolled me in a different school despite my desire and research into other ones where I at least would have something to do to balance my studies. At that point, I wasn't doing well. I didn't build any bridges with any schoolmates. I was noticeably more intellectual and tended to go against the grain. It was clear that I was the only person I knew, and I still didn't have any sense of identity. So, having a clear place in the social structure, positive reinforcement, and some semblance of actual choice made for the perfect environment to finally lock me in. I was fine to do what Jehovah and his organization wanted, because they wanted me. With my parents' divorce, there wasn't much of a family dynamic anymore. It was just get things done and get out of the way. My father had moved out and threw himself into his work to cope. My mother's coping mechanism was going to college, despite having teenage children in the house, and working full-time to cover it. The Jays in the Kingdom Hall offered some sense of normalcy and belonging that I was missing everywhere else. I even found friends amongst other quote-unquote young ones at the Kingdom Hall. I even found out that a classmate of mine was a practicing witness, and we've developed a genuine friendship. Granted, there were other witness kids at school, and we ended up getting along too, but this particular friend was special. That friend was probably the most genuine friend I would experience through high school. Let's call her Cass. Cass was a very sharp young woman, both academic and witty, very funny, and of course, I thought she was quite pretty too. We grew close quickly, knowing that we each provided positive association. It was a win-win scenario, and that was probably the linchpin to locking in my faith. Additionally, I discovered more and more kids at school shared my faith. A few stood out to me, but the most important one aside from Cass was, let's call him Sean. Sean was another young man in my class, and he was just a normal guy, wanted to be a firefighter, which they did have at Bethel, so he did school-sponsored classes for it. He wasn't anything special in his congregation, but he was going to school, going to meetings, and was baptized, so he counted as good association. It was nice having a social circle, even if it was small. And once I was in, there wasn't a lot of reason to look out. Honestly, it gave me a reason to look down on others at school. I had a reason to feel better than them, superior to them, and there was finally a reason that they wouldn't accept me. It wasn't that I was trying too hard or not finding common ground. No, it was that they were stuck in the grip of Satan's system, and only I'd be able to get out of it. It's worth noting that without an active interest in the Kingdom Hall, I found that my parents had very little to talk to me about. Beyond my fluctuating performance in school, we didn't connect on much of anything. They both worked nights, so any opportunities to connect were far and few between. My siblings and I were long since used to fixing and reheating our own plates when we got hungry when Mom and Dad went to work. We hadn't had a proper sit-down family dinner for years at that point. Depending on how you looked at it, and yes, at that time I had a real psychologist opinion, I was the mini-mom in the house. I was doing my best to functionally raise and be there for my siblings, while I was struggling with my own adolescence. And frankly, I was awful at it. Which, in retrospect, makes sense. Kids ought not raise kids. But it's the hand we were dealt, well-meaning but otherwise absent parents. And that's probably why I dove in headfirst into the only consistency I could find, what I determined to be the truth. Somewhere around then, I had been talked into becoming an unbaptized publisher, and for all intents and purposes, was a Jehovah's Witness. Officially, according to the organization, I wasn't counted among the saved quite yet, but my hours were still good enough to count towards their yearbook. It would be a while until I figured that out. I was probably about 15 or so then, still developing my critical thinking skills on a conscious level, and unconsciously, I developed a case of cognitive dissonance. I was at the point where I could reconcile Jehovah's Witness truths with academic ones and allow them to coexist for the sake of getting through the day. I hadn't noticed this until I had decided to get baptized. At that point, I had found myself getting closer to a particular pair of my classmates. They were a rather sweet pair and had always been kind, so I thought it was logical to try and save them from the destruction that was going to happen any 5 minutes now. There had been a study we had regarding overpopulation and aging, which had a number of logical fallacies. I remember presenting the issues of the planet to my friends, then presenting the concept of biological immortality to them to entice them. It backfired heavily when I realized that overpopulation and the Earth having enough space for people that never aged, never died, just didn't make sense. And when I say I realized, This was when they brought it up. I dismissed it in my mind and resolved to try again later with these friends. Luckily, I never got around to it, but it was the first time I had seen any sort of cracks in my beliefs. Another thing that stuck in my mind was the bizarre teachings around the gay community and Jehovah's Witnesses. It's because of one of my few more worldly friends. We'll call him Leo. And Leo was gay. Very, very clearly, openly, and apparently gay. But Leo was also very cool. He dressed very well, was well-spoken and cheerful, even with the constant Catholic gay bashing to his face, and the JW gay bashing behind his back. Aside from Cass, pretty much every witness kid in that school looked down on Leo, so much so that my brain began to compartmentalize. I'd never seen him with a man, so he wasn't gay. He was always surrounded by girls. He could potentially be saved. And of course, he was good at Yu-Gi-Oh!, a very manly card game with absolutely no homosexual undertones, so he was okay. But deep down, it was very obvious Leo was gay. And more importantly, Leo was normal. He wasn't some deviant sexual predator intent on touching little children. He was just a normal kid, going to school and wanting to get out as quickly as he could. And I could relate to that. I'd push down that feeling from time to time, specifically as he got closer to graduating and as I got closer to baptism. But that little bit of friendship over a card game planted a seed in the cracks of my spiritual armor, and though I wouldn't know it then, I'm very thankful for it now. Ever closer to the next convention in my baptism, I had gone with the Jays to one of the other elders' homes for a gathering. A positive aspect of witness life was certainly gatherings. It was a socialization with age-appropriate friends in addition to positive association with the adults. And unlike any other social event I wanted to go to, my parents were 100% okay with me attending, so long as I brought my siblings. Downstairs in the basement, their son had a UFC heavy bag. Some of the baptized brothers decided to have a go at it for fun. Their form was poor, and each attack was worse than the last. This is where I learned another truth about the truth that I hadn't realized coming in, that shook my faith a bit more. I decided to take a turn on the bag, having had some martial arts training while my parents weren't terribly interested in the Kingdom Hall. It had initially been self-defense, but I quite liked kickboxing and taekwondo. It gave me a certain sense of self-confidence that I didn't normally have, and a level of calm and control. When you're raised as a Jehovah's Witness, you're taught to leave things in Jehovah's hands, or the hands of someone else, and be passive. Having any level of agency made me feel good. Better than having Holy Spirit did, but I don't think I knew that at the time. Anyway, I took a stance and delivered a few combos to the bag. I thought they were clumsy, unrefined, but I was wrong. I guess they were fluid, consistent, and complete. It must have been faster than I thought, because when I turned around, the room was in shock. I recall a brother asking how I did that, and I admitted to having a little training. It wasn't something I was actively doing, at least at the time, so they all breathed a sigh of relief and attributed it to muscle memory. As it turned out, martial arts were forbidden, as they were seen as a violent, worldly thing, which upset me as a martial artist, since it had offered me a lot of discipline, peace, and self-confidence. But I was so close to my baptism that I went along with things and hid my passion for my art, despite its positive benefits being in line with the fruit of the Spirit. That was crack 3 in the mask for anyone keeping track. It wasn't long after that the summer district convention was upon us. June 23rd, I remember the day well, the day before my baptism. I was making my rounds at the convention center, when it was still cooled with mountain air. That wouldn't last long, but it was good to walk around on my own in the stadium before it got unreasonably hot. There I ran into the few JW kids I recognized from school, the ones that had just graduated mostly or were set to graduate the next school year, which was nice. And of course, I got my usual runaround with Cass, people watching and picking out invited guests as opposed to our actual brothers and sisters. It felt nice. It felt good to belong. But that feeling wouldn't last the whole day. Just before the early morning music started, I ran into Sean, our would-be firefighter. Sean was with his mother, who was having a conversation with another group of women. I waved to them, they waved to me, and continued their conversation, so I turned my attention to my friend. But something wasn't right. His mother was recognizable to me, as they were on the same circuit and I'd see her pick him up from school occasionally. But she was standing a ways away from him. I didn't think much of it until I spoke to Sean, or tried to. Sean wasn't responsive as I delivered my usual JW pleasantries. His mother didn't acknowledge that anyone was speaking to him. There was a wall I couldn't see. I was apparently visibly confused as Sean slowly raised his head and quietly explained to me that he was disfellowshipped. I was stunned, and suddenly it all made sense. Sean wasn't the first disfellowshipped person I had met. On the contrary, I met a disfellowshipped man earlier in the year. Under what I assumed was a New Year's resolution, he was frail, short, skinny, and old. I'd never seen that old man at the Kingdom Hall before, and unconsciously went in for some good, old-fashioned JW love bombing. But, to my surprise, he didn't respond either, except to tell me he was disfellowshipped. Prior to that, I'd only read about disfellowshipping, but didn't think it applied in our congregation. Turned out, I was wrong. I never saw that little old man again after that, and sadly, the same would happen to Sean. "I'm disfellowshipped, dude," he said. I couldn't see his eyes. I faced a low fade, with his face towards his shoes, glasses nearly falling off his face. I felt my body tense up, as I didn't know how to respond. Suddenly, this was someone real who was disfellowshipped, not some mysterious old guy who had just flown in out of nowhere and vanished as quickly as he appeared. I had to see Sean at school, at assemblies, and, well, I guess that was it, but a third of my social circle had vanished without a trace. Seeing my apprehension, it looked like he had a realization. He was aware that I wasn't baptized yet, and he saw a loophole. "But you can still talk to me," were the last words I exchanged with him. He stammered them out, desperate, and because I had no other thoughts in my head, I backed away. I backed away from a lonely, desperate, depressed child of 16, because the next day I was going to enter into the same contract that he broke, and I can still see the pain in his face. I won't say that that moment changed my view of Jehovah's Witnesses. At that point, it didn't affect me, and it wouldn't be until many years later that I developed any sense of shame or guilt around that interaction. But to this day, abandoning one of the few friends I had in his darkest hour haunts me. At last, my baptism was upon us, and I took to the pool. June 24th, 2006. At the ripe old age of 16, I'd finally become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I would stand up and be counted. My faith had works. Unbeknownst to me, however, I had made a mistake. The moment I stepped onto that arena floor, I wasn't walking into a pool. Nay, I walked into a vice grip of control and manipulation going forward. While friends from the congregation and other witnesses in the assembly hall all shared kind words on the way back to my seat, the J's weren't quite as encouraging. I remember the first thing that Sister J had told me when I got back. Not that she was happy for me, or proud of me, none of that, no. It was about my first friend that I made in high school, that witness girl I told you about earlier. Cass, evidently, was someone I was meant to avoid. Now, you may be thinking, but wait a minute, Magog, wasn't she good association? And indeed, she was. Cass was my age, but she had gone through great lengths when she was young to skip through a couple grades, so when she was 16, she could pioneer full-time. And she was successful. She was working on getting a full-time job to move out and reduce the financial burden on her disabled parents. She was a regular attendee of her congregation meetings and in great standing. The days she and her family visited my hall, she was always ready with a well-worded and researched comment from the publication. She was modest in makeup, hair, and dress. The kid was the perfect association. And, more importantly, she was a good friend. She encouraged my studies and aspirations, and all the time we spent together was pleasant, and apparently that was a problem. Brother J echoed the sentiment when he confirmed what his wife had said. I should steer away from Cass because young sisters are always looking for eligible brothers to marry, and I should focus on Bethel's service. That was a stab in the heart for me. It was painful to hear. I admit I probably did have the occasional romantic thought about Cass. It was hard not to. But more importantly, I really cared about her as a friend too. This wasn't some wild, worldly girl trying to seduce me and steal me away from Jehovah. This was a baptized, faithful sister who only wanted the best for her fellow young witness. Someone who knew the challenges of going to that school and how to avoid the temptations, found solace and solidarity in another young person who actually had her back. And my Bible mentors expected me to turn my back on her at a snap of their fingers. And of course, trying to maintain Christian obedience, I did. I saw her one more time at that assembly. It was just us in our seats, and of course, 16-year-old me thought that she looked radiant. Looking back, we were both a little gawky and awkward, but hey, that's how being a teenager is. But that didn't matter. We talked one more time about goals. She was very excited and proud of me. We exchanged one last hug before she went home with her parents. It was probably longer than it should have been, really looking back, and in retrospect, that does solidify Brother and Sister J's argument. Regardless, that was the next big crack in the levee that was my Jehovah's Witness indoctrination. I'd rarely go to dwell on it going forward. Our congregation was relatively light on eligible young people, specifically young men, so I was put to work right away. I found myself doing more talks at the Kingdom Hall, running microphones, opening and closing meetings with prayers on a regular basis. I was building quite the base at the Kingdom Hall, all while my personal relationships broke down. Since Cass and a lot of other witness teens at school had graduated, I found myself a bit more isolated. I interacted with kids at school, but on a more shallow level. I mentally trivialized their issues in typical teen drama, including that of Sean's. When we returned to school that fall, he was a visibly changed man. Well, still a boy at the time. We were high school kids, but I digress. I later learned that he had experienced intimacy for the first time with his girlfriend, just through eavesdropping. I never looked him in the eye or stayed in the same room as him, but there was a curiosity still, and every time he spoke, through any form of depression or the rare surge of confidence, I scoffed. This is why you're disfellowshipped, Sean. I shunned that boy, and I was so wrong for it, but everyone around me made me feel like I was right. Like I took a stand for Jehovah. So I continued to eat with, sit with, and study with the worldly children, while my actual spiritual brother suffered in silence. The hypocrite I was. At home, my father and siblings were generally neutral about the whole thing. My parents didn't make my baptism. My father had a medical emergency in the months before, and we were still catching up. Also, my mother especially went out of her way to let me know that I wasn't quite ready to be baptized. In an odd form of rebellion, I had doubled down on my desire to do so. A family friend, whose children were loosely in the faith that we had grown up with, ended up having to talk me down from getting baptized out of spite and really considering my future, reminding me that it was a choice for myself. That family friend was like another mom, and she's someone I genuinely miss from the faith. In retrospect, I was probably better off taking a little more time like she had advised, but my quote, spiritual parents were a much stronger and pervasive influence at the time. Speaking of spiritual parents, Brother and Sister J continued to really tighten their control around me, and to a lesser extent my siblings. They would conduct family worship nights separate from our normal Saturday studies. Sister J even made the connection between fatherless children and our parents not being active in the faith, and directly expressed to us that she was trying to pick up where our mother couldn't. That's something of a strange thing to say to a child. Again, we were teenagers at the time, but even then I found it pretty offensive and off-putting. Our parents weren't bad parents, just detached from the faith. I have criticisms about their parenting, but that's purely personal and has nothing to do with Sister J's standards. Well, actually, I guess it kind of did. My parents, like many JW parents, were pretty serious about not sparing the rod. My mom took that a little farther than she cares to admit, and she tends to admit to quite a lot. I don't recount a lot of it since it was pretty normal to JW kids to be spanked and beaten for mistakes and missteps, but it was always in the back of my mind. Anyway, let's keep talking. As these pressure points started to build up under the surface, I found myself doing more with the faith. I was placed in charge of field service groups from time to time, gathering territory cards, and around my 18th birthday, I was appointed ministerial servant. I had a part-time job at the local electronics store and was good with the audio, so I was appointed the audiovisual servant, and every advancement I made in the congregation made my home life a little worse. Being a zealous, qualified ministerial servant in a household run by a homey parent was odd. I was given the responsibility of keeping the household spiritually pure. The elders recognized that I technically couldn't tell my parents what to do in that regard. So long as my siblings were attending, then I remained qualified, though I was still expected to encourage my parents to come to the meetings. And the more I did that, the worse things got. I rarely tried with my father. He just wouldn't engage, or would push things off for a next time. My mother was a bit more defensive. She'd make statements with scripture, I'd turn logic around, and life would just get worse. It grew into a mutual resentment that still bothers me every day. And the oddest part about it was, despite the fact that she clearly didn't like me running the house spiritually, she was completely compliant about it. This was a woman in her 40s raising 3 teenagers as a single mother who was looking to her son to give prayers at family gatherings because he was technically the spiritual head of the household. She would wear head coverings while reading on occasion if I happened to wander into the room. It's so strange to watch your mother put on a head covering for a belief system that she doesn't practice anymore. And then after she does that, she reminds you that the trash needs to be taken out and you have to do dishes. The worst part was, everything that happened at home just proved the Watchtower doctrine. Some members of your family won't like that you're serving Jehovah, and I really saw that as proof that I was serving him correctly. So I pushed harder and started pioneering. I eventually was going to school 7 hours a day, working another 20 hours a week, commuting and spending 2 to 3 hours a day in the ministry, and that's not including meeting time. This continued regularly once I graduated. At that point, I needed guidance. My parents had always figured I was a smart kid, would know what to do, and assumed I'd pick a good college with a good career path in mind and would find a way to pay for it since they didn't have the money. The congregation, especially the elders and their wives, had Bethel service in mind for me. And without any other options, I had told my parents that I wanted Bethel. This was the conversation that destroyed my relationship with my mother forever, I'm convinced. For a long time, she was very excited about the ceremony of me graduating, going off to a college, and her getting ready for my next graduation. I wasn't interested in any of that. It didn't matter in the ministry, and that was my focus. This is where I think her whole base broke as well. On the one hand, she was obligated to feel good about me wanting to serve our God, Jehovah. On the other hand, she insisted that I needed to wait until I finished college. I disagreed, reminding her that Armageddon was pending, and there was more work to be done, and all that ceremony wouldn't matter in the end. It eventually ended up that if I didn't pick a school, I was under threat of being kicked out. I admit, my family relationship has never been the closest one. In fact, it's still never really recovered from this time more than 10 years in the future. But this was as bad as it had gotten. I informed the Jays of this, and they doubled down on the Bethel service rhetoric. They encouraged more hours, more time studying, more of everything. My social relationships broke down outside of the hall entirely, and the pressure was really bubbling to the surface. In the weeks leading up to my 19th birthday, I found myself getting sick. Just a regular cold, no big deal. It took me out of a meeting or two. I was back on the horse the next day, really. But then it would happen again, and soon I found myself sleeping through an alarm or two. I wouldn't really put this together, but the stress of trying to obey and please my family while not pleasing Jehovah was taking its toll on me. I was working full-time at that point as well as ministering full-time and had enhanced responsibilities at the Kingdom Hall with minimal recreation and no support at home. It just tires you out. Fundamentally, my beliefs were contradicting each other. On the one hand, I did love my family and wanted to have the closest relationship with them possible. On the other hand, I was in a religion that encouraged me to seek out others to fill the void because they weren't properly serving Jehovah, and I had close contacts that were filling that emotional void that repeatedly encouraged that with scripture. I think that's the point where Brother and Sister J noticed I wasn't maintaining the absolute perfection that they expected from the presiding overseer's son, or at least his spiritual son. So every conversation we had was a reminder to make every meeting always. Articles, phone calls, texts, they even took to picking us up specifically. At that point, I was getting a little tired of the overbearing couple who had nothing better to do than micromanage me and my siblings. Any semblance of independence, importance, and validity that I experienced up until then had dissolved. At that point, I had finally given in and enrolled in a local state college to at least have a degree to present to my parents. I tried to stay active as best I could. I continued working the microphones, audio equipment, and sitting behind the desk, but I kept a textbook in the car. I had learned a great deal about computers at my part-time job and finally had my own access to the internet. High speed finally, and a newly constructed supercomputer. Well, at the time, an AMD quad-core with an overclocked GeForce 8600 GT on perfect wired DSL connections that no one else could use since nothing else had built-in Wi-Fi at the time, and no one else really understood how to use it. I'd developed a bad habit of using Wikipedia to start my research for history and English papers at the time, and through that process started making discoveries that reaffirmed the previous cracks in my faith. Somewhere along the line of researching the Mormons, a distinctly American religion for our project on Angels in America, other sects fell into view. The Millerites, the Seventh-day Adventists, and a third one that struck me as special. One I was familiar with, the International Bible Students. The Bible Students were a sect. Watchtower hated sects, and they were one. I stayed up until 2 a.m. to finish that paper and arrived to class late. I'd burned most of my waking hours stumbling down Wikipedia page after Wikipedia page on the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society and its child company, the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. The sources on the page were accurate. We did believe that all of humanity was in a sinful state. We did believe there is no such thing as hell and hellfire. We did call Hades the common grave of mankind. It was objective, neutral language. And if that was accurate, why not the next page down? The one about Silent Lambs, the organization that had been fighting child predators from within the Watchtower. All the while I researched, and I read, and I rapidly developed my critical thinking skills. Actually, I think the comedian Laura House said it best when criticizing her southern United States upbringing.
Then I went to college. Woo! I read what I call a real book. I was like, well, this is terrible. The South what? That slogan should be, the South will apologize immediately.
And all the while, the Jays continued to squeeze and coerce and control. Something had to give. And from there, I had to drop off cold turkey from the meetings. I stopped answering phone calls from the Jays and would rarely answer the door. Other friends and their families would stop by from time to time to encourage me and my siblings, who had followed suit and also given up on the Kingdom Hall. I continued to assert the same thing, that college was overwhelming and we were just biding our time as best we could. I learned more about our heritage, our organization, how their beliefs weren't unique, and learned about how long the organization had existed, how it decried schisms but had been the result of one. Eventually, the calls and visits stopped, and I found myself integrating into normal life. I found a few old classmates that I got along with and developed friendships with them in college, learned how to talk to romantic interests, became social with coworkers, and even tried to visit with my parents a bit more often. It wasn't quite as all-encompassing and fulfilling as the love bombing from the Kingdom Hall, but it was a start. I didn't shake all the beliefs that the religion had instilled in me for some time. For example, I was still very adverse to celebrating holidays and birthdays. It took me until my mid-20s to have my first birthday party, and I still avoided certain forms of entertainment, having been conditioned against it. I even considered returning to the Kingdom Hall under my own power, now that I had moved out and started my life for myself. But that idea shattered when my new presiding overseer called me up for a shepherding visit. I was at a friend's house at the time when I got the call. It turned out that Brother Jay had moved on to another congregation, so one of the other elders took over. We'll call him Brother Childs, because, I'll tell you, he looked and spoke exactly like Jackie Childs from Seinfeld. Honestly, if Johnny Cochran didn't exist, I would swear he was based on this brother. Anyway, he called me up about a rumor that had been spreading around the Kingdom Hall. Keep in mind, I was 21 at the time and working on my final internship to graduate. But the rumor had it that I had a girlfriend and that she was pregnant, and it was corroborated by another brother that I had served as a ministerial servant with. I was fuming at that point and just couldn't take any more nonsense. I tried to find some form of reason in there, but at one point or another, I just got real tired. My father had just passed away a month beforehand, and we had just had his funeral. I hung up the phone and deleted the number, and that was my final dealing with my old congregation to this day. I'm certain this was an attempt to have me come in for a judicial meeting. I am also certain I was deleted as a ministerial servant. I can't quite tell if I was disfellowshipped, and frankly at this point, I don't think I care that much. The only reason to preserve my anonymity is on the offhanded chance that I can reconnect with a few dear friends that actually followed up with me at the end of my career as a witness, and to protect some Pomey and Peamy family members, though that seems like it won't be something I need to do for much longer. I don't think I carry too much trauma from my Jehovah's Witness upbringing, really. I think I can attribute some self-confidence problems to it, some of which I still fight to this day. I'm certain my devotion to the religion has made me miss out on some wonderful opportunities. And I admit I struggled with being a nice guy for some time and had to learn a few of those lessons the hard way. I suppose if I have any regrets, it's the participation in shunning, because my dedication to the organization was more important than the desperate plea for help from an isolated, depressed, scared teenage boy who just had his whole life ripped away from him for committing the crime of having an age-appropriate girlfriend. I regret deliberately losing contact with my closest and dearest friend at the time because a pair of people I had just met a year or two back that I only ever saw when studying the Bible thought that a legitimate friendship was a hindrance to me, all because it could potentially lead to a romance with someone I had a real bond with outside of our spirituality. Letting this organization and those that interpreted its doctrine to a T direct everything I did is probably the worst thing I've done with my life. 21 years of life dedicated to being controlled under the guise of a choice. It wasn't like the elders said. Satan doesn't push people away from this organization. The organization does that very efficiently on its own. It doesn't take an absolutely shattered faith or the abuse of a child as spouse or even a bad habit like smoking or drinking. All it takes is following the religion the best you can until you have nothing left to give. Then you'll be punished and ridiculed just enough to see exactly what the religion is. I know this wasn't an especially shocking or eventful tale for 20-odd years in Watchtower, but I'm hoping someone will find solidarity in my story. Maybe it'll help them reach out to a friend that's being shunned, or perhaps stay in touch with someone special, or even make a choice to find more balance in their life before they work themselves into the ground. But that's all I can offer you for now, XJW agents. I think I'm going to take tomorrow off, but I still look forward to reading your experiences in the comment section down below. Until then, remember agents, the elders may be watching you, but Darth Magog is watching the Watchtower.